Alright, so today we're going to talk about start off where we left off, where the U.S. establishes a policy of containment. Faced with the Soviet threat, Truman decides it was time to stop babying the Soviets. So in February 1946, George Kennan, an American diplomat in Moscow, proposed a policy of containment. The U.S. policy of containment was the measures to prevent the spread of communism. This policy was based on the belief that foreign policy goals with Soviet leaders included conquering other nations, not simply securing of their own borders. So here it's a Iron Curtain cartoon from 1946. The American policy of containment soon expanded into a policy known as the Truman Doctrine. This doctrine, first used in Greece and Turkey in the late 40s, vowed to provide aid, money, and military supplies to support free people who are resisting outside pressures. This was done to stop the spread of communism. So the Cold War was formed. It represented the conflict between the U.S. and USSR from 1945 to 1991. No direct confrontation occurred during this time. The phrase was coined by Walter Lippmann, a newspaper columnist, who published a book on containment called The Cold War. The Marshall Plan. Post-war Europe was devastated economically. Factories had been destroyed and resources had been used in the name of war. In an effort to help countries and keep them from being persuaded of communism, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed that the U.S. aid package, the Marshall Plan. The American Recovery Plan was aid in the form of money, supplies, and machinery that would help to end Europe's hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos. 16 countries accepted the Marshall Plan and received more than $13 billion in aid. Western Europe began to recover, and communism will lose its appeal to voters here. Eastern Europe was forced by the Soviet Union to decline the offer and continued to struggle. So the country that received the most was Great Britain, France, Italy, West Germany, and Holland. You also have Austria, Belgium, and Luxembourg, Greece, Denmark, Norway, Turkey, Ireland, Sweden, Portugal, Yugoslavia, Iceland, and then other. So, and you can see the towers kind of based on in millions of aid, based on how much. Alright, here's a Can He Block It? Political cartoon, a martial aid cartoon from 1947. Superpowers will struggle over Germany. At the end of the war, Germany was divided among the Allies into 4 zones for the purpose of occupation. The United States, France, and Great Britain decided to combine their 3 zones into 1 zone, became known as West Germany and West Berlin. The USSR was upset by this and sought to occupy all of Berlin. It attempted to do this by isolating West Berlin from West Germany. In 1948, Stalin closes the highway, railroads into West Berlin and creates a Berlin blockade. So here is our map, shows the blockade of the Berlin Wall that was built eventually in 1961. When the Berlin blockade began, the 2.1 million residents of West Berlin had only enough food for 5 weeks. That led to a dire situation. And not wanting to invade and start a war with the Soviets, America and Britain started the Britain Airlift to fly supplies into West Berlin. The Berlin Airlift, Britain and U.S. flew supplies like food, medicine, clothing, raw materials, and even fuel into West Berlin. This lasted for 327 days. Planes would take off and land every few minutes around the clock. They made 277,000 flights. They brought in 2.3 million tons of supplies. Realizing they were beaten and suffering a public relations nightmare, the Soviets lifted their blockade in May 1949. The Berlin's blockade increased Western Europe's fear of Soviet aggression. As a result, 10 West European nations joined the United States and Canada on April 4, 1949, to form a defensive alliance known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Better known as NATO, NATO was based on collective security. This is an agreement by which an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. So basically, if you attack if you attack the United States, the other 9 countries will come to the United States aid. The Soviet Union's counter to NATO was the Warsaw Pact. U.S.-Soviet relations thawed after Stalin's death in 1953, but West Germany's entry into NATO scared the Soviets because it created no buffer zone from NATO. So they formed the Warsaw Pact, which is a military alliance with 7 Eastern European countries. This is an alliance with the Soviet Union and its satellite countries. So these include countries like Soviet Union, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania. And so you can see here, this is a 1956 map. The countries kind of in a bluish color are NATO. Kind of this color here, and then this color here is the Warsaw. Alright, China becomes a communist country. Alright, for 2 decades, Chinese communists had struggled against the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek. The U.S. supported Chiang and gave the Nationalist Party $3 billion in aid during World War II. The United States supports Chiang, but its government are inefficient and corrupt. However, Mao Zedong's Communist Party in China was strong. Mao Zedong was the leader of Communist China. The peasants will flock to the Red Army, and by 1945, the Communists controlled North China. After Japan left China at the end of the war, Chinese nationalists and communists fought a bloody civil war. Between 1944 and 1947, the U.S. sent military aid to nationalists to oppose communism. The United States eventually cut down on aid because Marshall felt it was more important to spend the limited foreign aid resources of the United States on saving Western Europe from Stalin. In 1948, Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist, and his army were forced off the mainland to Taiwan and a few other small islands. Chiang and the nationalists fled China to neighboring Taiwan, also known as the island of Formosa. Mao and the communists established the People's Republic of China. The United States does not recognize the Communist Chinese government. Chinese nationalists in Taiwan or Formosa. In 1941, Chiang Kai-shek and other nationalist leaders retreated to the island of Taiwan, which lies about 100 miles off the southeast coast of the Chinese mainland. There, the United States helped set up a nationalist government, the Republic of China. From 1949 through the 1960s, the United States poured millions of dollars of aid into the Taiwanese economy. During the 1970s, a number of nations, including the United States, decided to end diplomatic relations with Taiwan and establish ties with Communist China. With the collapse of Soviet communism in the early 90s, relations between Taiwan and the United States will improve. And then in 2001, the United States will sell weapons to Taiwan to bolster the island's nation defense system. So here's another image of Taiwan up closer. America is going to react to communist takeover. The U.S. public is stunned by the communist takeover. Conservatives blame Truman for not sending enough aid. They ask, if it is important in Europe to contain communism, why is it not so in Asia? Many believe that the policy of containment had failed and communism was expanding. So the American fear of communism and communist expansion was increasing during the 1940s and early 50s. Alright, that is it.